Hello and welcome to the first ever Q&A video I have ever made. It only took around 3 years for me to get around to doing this, but better late than never. So let's just jump straight into it. Okay, so Kevin asked, how can I affect the most change when it comes to saving and protecting animals from suffering? And this has got 10 upvotes, which is nice to see. So this is a very good and important question, but unfortunately, it's not easy to answer that question with any certainty. But I did make a video about effective animal charities, which might interest you, called How to Multiply Your Impact as a Vegan. And in that video, you'll also find additional links in the description box with more reading to do on the topic. So there are two powerful tools we have at our disposal here, one of which is what we do with our money, and the other is what we do with our time and our career. When it comes to donations, one place to potentially think about donating to is the EA Animal Welfare Fund. And when it comes to your career, one place where you can go to get input on that is 80,000hours.org. So I hope that helps, and sorry I can't give a more certain and definite answer. Am I single? Yes. Regarding the question you've raised regarding wild animal suffering, what would the end goal be? I don't see how wild animal suffering can be eliminated without all the predators being eradicated. So eliminating wild animal suffering can't be the end goal if you want to have wild animals, I suppose. What are your thoughts on this? That's a good question, and there are several things to talk about here. One thing to mention is that we sometimes have a tendency for all or nothing thinking. So if there's a problem, we feel that we need to be able to completely solve that problem, or it's not even worthwhile addressing it. I occasionally see comments on my YouTube channel telling me that I'm crazy for thinking that we can end wild animal suffering, which is not something that I think I've ever said on my channel. When it comes to human suffering, I think a lot of people have the opinion that it is totally unrealistic to get to a world where human suffering doesn't exist. But those same people will still recognize that working hard to try to reduce human suffering is still a worthwhile cause, regardless of whether we can get to a point where it's completely abolished. People don't write emails to the Against Malaria Foundation telling them that they're insane for trying to address human suffering because it's inevitable and they'll never get rid of it completely. No, we understand that even sparing one person from suffering terribly is meaningful and important. If that isn't already obvious to you, then try keeping your hand on a hot stove. So to put it a bit simply, the goal is to help as many animals as possible. And, we can't help them all, but we can help some of them. And while that may feel like a drop in the ocean to us, to each individual that we help, it can feel like the most important thing in the world. One thing to mention here is that I don't know what the future will be like. I have, as a heuristic, a belief that the more people that want the world to be a good place to live for everyone, the more likely we are to get towards that goal. But I don't know how many animals we'd be able to save or how much suffering we would be able to reduce, even if everyone agreed on this goal. I did make one video you might find interesting, and that video is called How to Solve Wild Animal Suffering, but that is, of course, a little bit of a clickbaity title. But it does mention some of the things that we might be able to do in the future to help animals. It talks about things like vaccinations, fertility control, gene drives. One cause of uncertainty for me is I just don't know what the future will be like. It could be that technologically speaking, we don't get much further than we are today. But it's also possible that in the future we will have capabilities that today would seem magical. If in the future we become super advanced, technologically speaking, then interventions that are very large in scale and super sophisticated that today would seem laughable, perhaps would become realistic. But who knows? Something worth mentioning is that caring about reducing wild animal suffering isn't just about thinking about ways we can intervene in ecosystems to make things better. It's also about caring about the effects that we're already having. For example, when pesticides are used in agriculture, the amount of suffering that these pesticides will cause to insects, if insects are conscious, will likely vary depending on the type of pesticide. And even though pesticides cause suffering, it's also possible that using pesticides results in less suffering overall than if you were not to use them. Another thing to mention is that if in the future we do become very technologically advanced, we may spread wild animal suffering. For instance, we may spread ecosystems full of suffering to additional planets, or even to complex digital simulations that may be sentient. And I think that the risk of us doing that is lower if we can acknowledge that strong and involuntary suffering is bad, and is something that we ought to try and prevent, regardless of who it is experiencing it. I talk more about the ways in which we might increase wild animal suffering in a video that I will put here or here. why do you want to alleviate all suffering when all we want as vegans is for humans to not be the cause of suffering and death wherever it is possible to do so? I guess it seems a bit weird to talk about what all vegans want like that. I mean, I guess there are some things that vegans have reached a consensus on, but for me, whether or not humans are the cause of someone's suffering doesn't seem particularly important. I mean, if I could press a button to remove humans as the cause of factory farming and instead an alien species was the cause, well, as far as I'm concerned, the problem hasn't been fixed, right? It's still there and it's equally as bad as it was before. What I care about is the suffering, not whether or not humans are the cause of it. And if we try to think about this from the perspective of the animal, I think it's fair to say that they wouldn't give a damn whether humans are the cause of it, or whether the alien is the cause of it, or whether it occurred naturally. What they care about is their experience. So that's what I care about too. In other words, I care about animal suffering. That's why I'm vegan. And it doesn't matter whether they're suffering because of me, an alien, or a naturally occurring disease. I think we ought to help them if we can. What do you think of the idea that we should kill predators? So I think there's been a few YouTubers talking about this now, including Vegan Gains. So I understand the argument from consistency, where if we imagine a human child was being attacked by a hungry lion, we would feel that we should intervene and help that child, even if it results in killing the lion in self-defense. Now, if we just switch the victim to a non-human animal, it seems speciesist to say in that case, we shouldn't intervene and we should let nature run its course. Now, that seems pretty solid to me, but as soon as we move out of the hypothetical world and into reality, I think there are a few reasons why we shouldn't be advocating for the killing of predators. Firstly, there is the fact that to most people, it intuitively sounds batshit crazy. Now, the idea that we should help wild animals at all is an unusual idea. And I don't think it's good if people's first exposure to someone making an argument to help wild animals involves killing predators as a solution. Unfortunately, some people already assume that that is what the movement to help wild animals is. I've never advocated or even talked about the killing of predators, but I still sometimes see comments on my videos of people saying things like, Humane Hancock wants to kill predators. And this points to a larger issue that I've noticed, which is that many critics of mine act as if predation is the only cause of wild animal suffering. But in reality, there are many different forms of wild animal suffering. And that's not to say that I don't think we should be talking about predation. I think predation must be unbearable and is probably accounts for some of the most intense experiences in the wild. But look, the movement to reduce wild animal suffering is in its infancy. And it seems to me that advocating for something so controversial seems risky and perhaps ineffective. I think even if you think it is the morally right thing to do, it just doesn't seem like a policy that's going to come to fruition. The thing is that there are so many potential ways we could help wild animals in the future that it seems risky to talk about one that is just so counterintuitive to most people. Ultimately, we want to help as many animals as possible. So when advocating for wild animals, we want to try and do it in a way that gets people on board, not in a way that makes us look absolutely insane. So in a hypothetical vacuum, then sure, I think you can make a strong argument for consistency. But when we enter the real world, I think there are reasons why it might not be a very good thing to advocate for. I want to mention a few extra things on this, actually. One thing to mention is that if humans did want to intervene to reduce a population size of a certain species, or to stabilize it, or to prevent the numbers of a species from increasing, there are other ways to achieve this other than killing them. One way to do so would be to use contraception, which I get on the surface level, it might seem a bit ridiculous at first, right? Like, have you ever tried putting a condom on a lion? Well, I have, and it's not easy, let me tell you. But actually, it's already been tried with some success with deer. Sorry, I mean, contraception has been tried with success, not putting condoms on deer. That hasn't been tried yet. Why haven't they tried that yet? And presumably, contraception is something that we will be able to do in more sophisticated ways in the future. If the population size of a predator goes down, whether or not that leads to a world with more or less suffering probably depends on the specifics of that situation and that ecosystem. And our abilities to predict the outcomes of different interventions on an ecosystem are currently quite limited. I think that being eaten by a wolf and being shot by a human are both often terrible experiences. But if I was a deer and I had to choose one, I would choose the latter. I also think it's possible that there may be less suffering in ecosystems that have large populations of larger animals like elk and deer and smaller population sizes of smaller animals like mice and insects. But at the same time, my knowledge of ecosystems is quite limited. And even for ecologists who study this stuff, there is still a lot they don't know. How different ecosystems are to live in from a life quality perspective is not a topic that has been researched nearly as much as it should be. Something I currently do take a stand against is rewilding and reintroducing wolves to areas where they don't currently exist. And I talk more about that in my video about Yellowstone. Anyway, I feel like that was a little bit of a waffle, but hopefully somewhere in there I answered your question. Okay, there we have it. The first ever Q&A video has been done. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for submitting your questions. I'm sorry if I didn't get around to answering yours. Yeah, let me know what you thought about this type of video. I quite enjoyed doing it. I just want to express my gratitude to everyone who is supporting the channel via Patreon or other means. It means a lot to me, and these videos are possible because of your support, so thank you. Do let me know what you thought of this type of video. I'm happy to do another Q&A if you think it's worthwhile. And yeah, I hope you're having a good week so far, and I will see you very soon with another video.